Hey everyone, welcome back to the Going Disparate podcast with Pam and Mara. I am your host, Pam Rogers.
And I am your host, Mara Dolan. She's a Republican, I am a Democrat, and we practice nonviolent political communication. Isn't that right, Pam?
That's a really interesting way of putting it, Mara, like nonviolent. That is correct. We don't
Right.
punch each other. I don't try to run you over with my car. So you're nonviolent.
No, we don't insult each other. We don't make fun of each other. We respect each other and we like each other. And that's what this podcast is all about. And if you're listening, you've already found us, but you should know you can find us anywhere podcasts are posted. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Please hit subscribe and give us a 5-star review so that even more people can find us. And don't forget, we want to hear from you. You can email us at pamandmara@gmail.com and find us on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter, just at Going Disparate.
It's quite a lot to say, Mara. That's a lot. I don't know how you remember it all.
It's a labor of love. Boy, am I excited about today's guest.
I know. Isn't this really exciting?
This is amazing. And folks, usually in this part of the podcast, we do hot takes on crime, but we're not going to do that today, except I will let you know, I am still reading about Lizzie Borden and it is amazing. And Pam, did you know that when Lizzie Borden was tried in Massachusetts with a capital case, which this was because she was charged with 2 counts of murder in the first degree, they would have 3 judges preside over the trial?
I didn't know that.
Isn't that amazing?
Was it?
Pardon me?
What year was it? What year?
Oh, you would ask. It was the 19th century, so it was the 1800s.
I'm glad we're still talking about it though. This is 130, 140 years later.
You know, the more I read about the trial, and because the question has always been, given the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, why was she found not guilty? It really kind of seems to me that people just did not want to believe that a nice young lady from a good family was capable of that. But now it's time to introduce our wonderful guest today. You ready, Pam?
Can I just tell you before he gets on here?
Yes.
We are going to be having Corey Lewandowski on today. And Corey is a good friend of mine. He and I became friends when I was a state rep, and he came in to run United States Senator Bob Smith's 2002 re-election campaign. And I was working on that campaign, and we became friends. We've been friends ever since. And he is a really, really fantastic guy, really interesting guy, obviously worked for President Donald Trump. So we have a lot to talk to him about.
We do. Here we go. It's connecting. He's coming up.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, how are you?
Can you hear us okay?
Bet.
Hey, it's great to see you. I want to introduce you to our audience. Today we have Corey Lewandowski with us. He's a 3 times New York Times bestselling author, longtime political strategist and advisor, campaign manager to Donald Trump's successful 2016 bid for president, and most importantly, he is a husband and father to his beautiful wife and 4 children. Welcome, Corey.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much for Corey for coming on. You know, Pam's a Republican, you know, I'm a Democrat, and we go disparate at the end of the show, but we're here just to find out what you have to say. And I am really looking forward to it.
Great. Let's get it on.
So we know that you always have a lot to say, Corey. So, a lot to say. And actually, let me just ask you this question, because when I was going through your biography, and I know you wrote 3 books. Were all 3 of them bestsellers on the New York Times list?
So the first 2 were New York Times bestsellers. The first one was on the list for about 13 weeks. That was called Let Trump Be Trump. The second book, called Trump's Enemies, which, if you have followed the news in the last week, the Durham report cites almost all of the statistics that were in our book, specifically the secret meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch, which took place on the tarmac in Phoenix on page 67. We referenced the meeting at inside the Oval Office with at the time Vice President Joe Biden, President Obama, the CIA director, the FBI director, the DIA director, the NSA director, where they hatched the plan to spy on Donald Trump and the campaign. So both of those books made the New York Times bestseller list. And then the third book about Donald Trump was on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, but not the New York Times bestseller list.
Okay, well, that's still pretty damn impressive, honestly. That was great. And thank you for reminding me about the Loretta Lynch, Bill Clinton tarmac meeting. I actually forgot all about that.
I, of course, for the record, am not going to agree with everything you say, and I'm just noting that for the record, but it's fine. I'm here to hear what you think.
Well, no, it's not about agreeing or disagreeing, to be honest with you. What it's about is actually bypassing the media, which has become so biased, and what they've done is they've lost their credibility by and large. When the media doesn't cover a national press story last week where the chairman of the House Oversight Committee provides information that was obtained by the banks under a warrant, and not one minute of NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, or MSNBC covered the fact that there were suspicious activity reports to the current president's son, and that they have found tens of millions of dollars which were paid by foreign governments. That's not Corey Lewandowski doing that. That's the bank reporting the information. The fact that the mainstream media refuses to cover that is a disservice to the American people. And that's why outlets like this have become so important, because you can bypass the unbelievable bias, which has become the media, and go directly to people, and they can choose to listen to what they want now.
Well, I will certainly agree that there are issues with media, even well-respected, long-time publications that I've relied on all my life. I don't find them as reliable as I used to. But I totally agree with you. And that's why Pam and I are doing this podcast, because what we want to talk about is what people actually think and how they see things, and just let them say for themselves.
I think it's so important. Look, as you travel around, there used to be a time, and honestly, for us people who are old, it wasn't that long ago, where 4, 5, and 7 at 5 o'clock were the news outlets, and the titans of the news industry just reported the news, factually based news. They didn't put in their own perspective. And what did we see last week? Donald Trump came to my home state of New Hampshire, and he conducted a town hall interview with CNN, a major media outlet. Donald Trump, by every account, not only is he a former president of the United States, he's the leading candidate by every public poll to be the next Republican nominee, and is a credible candidate. Now, the fact that there was such outrage by members of CNN that they gave a, quote, platform to a person like this tells me all the bias that we see. So Anderson Cooper comes out, who is a well-known, well-established reporter, 60 Minutes reporter, and says, if you never want to watch CNN again, we understand. Oliver Darcy comes out and writes a piece that says it's distasteful and shameful that our network provided a person like this the opportunity to put their message out. Look, I don't agree with Joe Biden on probably 90% of his policy issues, but he is the leading candidate to be the Democrat presidential nominee for the 2024 election cycle, and he should have a platform to relay those messages. And the same is true with Donald Trump. And when the media comes out and says he's not entitled to that, that is where I have a real problem with members of the media. Because if you're a journalist, you're Jake Tapper or you're Anderson Cooper, your job is not to put a certain spin on a story or dissuade viewers or listeners from getting the news. Your job is simply to report the news. And if you want to be a commentator, there is a place and a role for that as well. But don't pass yourself off as a journalist when you're trying to actually be a political commentator, because they're two very different things, in my opinion.
Which is true, totally true, Corey, and I agree with you. And I don't watch mainstream media. I do watch a little bit of Fox News. I don't watch a lot of Fox News. I don't watch a lot of news anymore, because I actually get sick of, if you watch a lot of Fox News, it's the same stuff over and over and over again. And I'm like, yeah, I actually agree with you, right? I don't need to watch you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I already agree with you. You already have me. So I do like outlets like this because we do have the opportunity to just be like, hey, this is what I think. Hey, this is what I think. You know, this are our viewpoints. This is why we disagree. This is why we agree. You know, like just, and it's fine, right? It's the whole point.
Well, that's right. And look at Fox News and most viewers try to go and look at an outlet that they believe represents their respective values, whether you're watching MSNBC because you think that they're right, or you're watching Fox News because you think that they're right. CNN used to be considered a very middle of the road, newsworthy organization that people were turned to predominantly for international news coverage. That's really where they excelled for a long time and just reported on those facts. But over the course of the last probably 5 years, we've seen a massive decline in their news reporting and going back to what has become no longer journalistic integrity, but it's inserting your own political and personal beliefs into the stories. And I think what you see with that is people just get turned off. I think people get turned off because they want to find outlets that just report the news without the bias and without the propaganda. And again, I go back to, it wasn't that long ago when you could turn on the news and watch Walter Cronkite, who we found out was a liberal, but nobody knew it when he reported the news. And that was perfectly fine, right? Dan Rather had his own personal beliefs and opinions, but didn't express those to the viewership. They just reported what was transpiring during Vietnam. Another so many people dead today. That's not a Republican or a Democrat ideal. It's not anti-American or pro-American. It was a factual statement that they made. And then the viewers got to draw their own conclusions if they wanted to change the news cycle by doing something about it. And that's what led to a number of the protests during the Vietnam War, because of the outlets.
I just want to ask you a question about sort of the town hall format. I noticed that there were no audience questions. And I just think it's really good for candidates to talk to people and see what people want to know. So I'm wondering if you think that in future, there might be opportunities for audience questions.
Absolutely. And what's important to know is that CNN chose this audience. This was not an audience chosen by the Trump campaign. So CNN is the one who chose the members to come and participate. They selected them based on their own criteria. Donald Trump has always done exceedingly well when it comes to audience participation, audience questions. I look back at the Hillary Clinton debate at Hofstra University where audience questions were given. I look at a number of the what we call in the rounds, where Donald Trump would be placed in the middle of a group of people and then take questions from the circular firing squad. It was very, very conducive to him, particularly in Iowa, in those small settings. In Cincinnati, Ohio, we did it a number of times. So I think those are great. And I also think it provides some relief to the moderator, who very candidly has a difficult time, regardless of your level of expertise and experience, of keeping up with Donald Trump.
Yeah, there were, and I watched the CNN town hall, and there were audience questions, Mara, so I'm not sure. There weren't a lot.
Yeah, there were a couple. They asked some questions, and they were very straightforward, but really it was focused on the moderator asking the questions. And, the questions, in my opinion, and look, in full disclosure, I worked at CNN. They hired me, and I was a commentator and chose to leave there on my own accord. But the questions were supposed to be to a Republican audience, and the questions revolved around January 6th. The questions revolved around the goings-on in New York. The questions revolved around the documents that were removed from Mar-a-Lago. These traditionally in a Republican primary, and you would ask questions of, what is your opinion on transforming entitlements? Where do you believe the national debt should be? Border security matters. A number of the questions that were asked during the town hall, and it's perfectly fine, Donald Trump was capable and able to answer them, were more general election matters, in my opinion, because most of the people who I think were going to cast their ballot in a Republican primary are not making their final decision on who to vote for based on the outcome of the January 6th investigation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I watched that whole debate, and Corey, I have to admit, I've only seen clips of the president since he's been out of office. I've just seen a few clips of him. Like, I don't really pay attention. I don't watch a lot of news, but so I haven't really seen him. But when I started watching him, and I'm probably like 10, 15 minutes in, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've missed this guy. Like, oh my gosh, like I forgot how much I enjoy him. Like, I love how he's such a fighter. And I'm probably not the only one in America that watched that and was like, oh, such a, breath of fresh air. But do you get the sense that when people kind of see him again, that they kind of say the same thing? Like, oh my gosh, wow, I missed you.
Look, I've said this many times publicly. Barnum and Bailey's didn't go out of business because they couldn't find elephants. Donald Trump is the greatest show on earth. You have to go and watch him to follow him, right? You go to a sporting event because you know what's going to happen. You go to a Trump rally because you know what he's going to say or do, and you want to be there. You want to be able to tell your children and grandchildren, I was there when Donald Trump said this or did this or whatever it is. It is a show. It is a spectacle. Donald Trump understands the power of television. He understands the power of the soundbite. You have to remember, when he was the executive producer and the star of The Apprentice for nearly 2 decades, right? He had already honed his skills in the New York media world for 20 years. And now he has more time on the television than probably all of the news anchors combined through that expertise. And it made him exceptionally rich, and it made him exceptionally popular in culture across the United States before he ever ran for politics. And so look, when people see Donald Trump, they don't have to agree with what he says. They don't have to condone the way he delivers the message. But I think they have to respect that his convictions are true and don't waver. And when he does that, even if you disagree with him, you have to respect that someone believes so much of something that they're saying that they're unwilling and undeterred to bring that to the forefront. The issue of illegal immigration comes to mind in the 2016 campaign. Nobody else was talking about it except Donald Trump was. And that's really, I think, why there is a subset of the American people who will never waver of their support of Donald Trump. And maybe that's only 30% in a Republican primary, but with an 8 or a 10 or a 12 candidate field, as it continues to grow, that's going to be enough to win.
Exactly. And Corey, I have a very different view, of course, of Trump, but I also recognize what you're saying in terms of the appeal that he has for a lot of people, which is why I never thought Ron DeSantis was going to be a strong candidate against him for the Republican nomination. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of their policy differences, because as a Democrat, I disagree with both of them very strongly on pretty much everything they say and do. So I haven't sort of gotten into the weeds. What's really the policy difference between Trump and DeSantis?
Look, I think if you put them side by side, there's a couple things. Ron DeSantis, first, when he did an interview with Tucker Carlson, probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, talked about the war going on in the Ukraine, said it was a skirmish, then ended up having a number of donors reach out to him and said, no, I must be on the side of the Ukraine. What did Donald Trump say at the town hall? They asked him, do you support Russia losing? And he said, I just want the violence to end, right? Donald Trump, who everybody thought was going to be this giant hawk on foreign policy and was going to start all these wars, has done the exact opposite. He's the first president in truly our lifetime in a 4-year term that didn't start an international conflict, didn't send our troops overseas, actually brought them home. And that's a very different perspective than what Mike Pence or Ron DeSantis think. They both believe that America is strongest when we're fighting our enemies overseas, commonly known as the Reagan Doctrine, right? Strength overseas, peace through strength. We show our military might in a foreign land to prevent that from transpiring here. Donald Trump says, no. Okay, we're going to bring our men and women in the military home. If you want our men and women in the military, particularly in Japan and other places, even though we've got a treaty, you're going to pay for that resource. And the media mocked him for that. He said, look, you want an aircraft carrier? It's $1 billion a day. That's how much it costs, $1 billion a day, Saudi Arabia. You want us to, to be in the Straits of Hormuz? You want us to be over in your area? It's $1 billion a day. You pay us, we'll put an aircraft carrier there. You don't, we'll bring our boys home. And
there's one other policy difference I want to ask you about, and then I promise I'll shut up because I know Pam has a million good questions to ask, and I feel like I'm hogging you, and I really don't want to do that. Trump, I know recently has said that he takes credit for Roe versus Wade being overturned, but he also said that a 6-week abortion ban is too restrictive and that we need to have exceptions for rape, incest, and the health of the mother. That's a huge shift. It's very different from Ron DeSantis. Does this mean that other Republicans might follow his lead on this? Because frankly, he's right. The DeSantis path on abortion is political suicide.
Well, Ron's changed, and I'll tell you why he changed. Ron's largest donor is publicly available. You can see how much money he's given. I think he's given him $30 million now, is someone who has approached a series of candidates on the issue of life and said 15 weeks is, what you need to do. And so Ron DeSantis has systematically moved the Florida legislature to pass a bill so that he could get to that position. I believe it's completely donor driven. I believe Ron had no core position on the matter. The other thing that Ron, and look, I say this with admiration. I know Governor DeSantis well. I've had dinner with him on numerous occasions. When it came to entitlement reforms, right? Governor DeSantis, when he was a member of Congress, was supporting raising the age for Social Security and Medicare. He was in favor of redoing, the entitlement reform plan. And it's something that Paul Ryan talked about back when he was the Speaker of the House. And it was something that was a buzz term of, hey, let's go do this because we need to have it solvent. Well, look, the truth is, as a 50-year-old guy, they've been telling me for 25 years it's going to go bankrupt. Mike Pence said yesterday that if we're lucky, we'll get 10 more years out of it. It's all BS, right? Because it's all moving numbers around and nobody's willing to make tough cuts. 70% of the federal budget is entitlements, right? And no one is going to change that. Everyone talks about it, but no one has the political courage to do it. And Ron DeSantis said he would do it. He also said, and he was interviewed by Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan asked him very point blank, if you were the president, would you ban TikTok? Ron DeSantis said, yes, I would. Well, 31 states have banned the use of TikTok and Florida has not been one of them. There's been no pushback on things like that. So, Ron has been a leader in some things. What I have noticed with Governor DeSantis is, and this is not a pejorative, I think it's just factual, and I like the guy personally, is he's really good at the press conference, announcing something big is going to happen, but then the actual implementation is different. The converse of that is true with Donald Trump. He's really terrible at the press conference a lot of times, but he forces people inside the structure, the albatross, which is the federal government, to move swiftly, to achieve results that most people didn't think could get done.
That's fantastic. And I know I'm like you, I admire Governor DeSantis as well. And I know you do too, but you're a Trump guy, but I get it. So, hey, listen, when you were talking about Trump being the greatest show on earth, what popped in my mind was 2015, you were kind enough to get my husband and I into Winnicott High School, like into the VIP room with like a bunch of other people from Hampton. And we listened to Donald Trump talk to us. It's the first time I've watched The Apprentice for a million years, right? So this is this guy I know from TV. And then we went out into the auditorium and he started talking and people are screaming and yelling and hooting and hollering. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is insane. I was like, I've been to a million political speeches in my life. None of them have ever been like this. It was so exciting. And I was like, there is something really, really special going on with this guy because people are just reacting in such a crazy fashion. Like he was amazing and I love him, but it was amazing so I agree with you. Like he is a totally different animal.
Well, and what most people don't recognize, and I've had the privilege to see and spend time with candidate Trump, Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, President Trump, post-President Trump, is in private, he's very self-deprecating. He's very magnanimous. He's exceptionally gracious in private. I can't tell you how many times, and I wrote about a couple of these in one or two of the books, of he would just pick up the phone and he would call me at home and I'd say, do you need something, sir? I'd say, I just want to talk to the kids. Say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. How's your Thanksgiving going? Do you guys need anything? Didn't need to do that. And look, we've had our public quarrels as well, right? Donald Trump and I. But the one thing that he and I think, have always had is a mutual amount of respect for each other. I've always respected him for what he's accomplished. He's always respected me for my work ethic and my tenacity and my fight. Does that mean we always agree on everything? No. But, when it comes down to it, he's the kind of guy who, if you need a favor, he's going to do anything he can to help you. And I've seen it with charity. You know how many times people have called me from charities and said, can you get us a night at Mar-a-Lago to auction off for our charity? Would you get something signed by the president? And Donald Trump does it time and time and time again, not for the public relations aspect, just because that's who he personally is. And sometimes you do those things and they go unseen and you don't get the credit for it. And other times people are out talking about, all the great things they're doing. He's been blessed to have a lot of money. I saw him give $150,000 to the Marine Corps Law Enforcement Foundation in New York one night because they were looking for money for fallen police officers. No press. We were at a dinner, black tie dinner. He just stood up and said, $150,000 from me. And, there were a lot of wealthy people in the room. Nobody matched him. He didn't do it for press. It was never reported on. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. And that's at the end of the day, how I see him. I see the faults. I'm not blind. I see the chaos and bedlam that sometimes follows around him. And sometimes I think he truly enjoys it, as in the Game of Thrones, right? The strongest will get to the top, and then you get a fight to stay on top. I see all that, absolutely. And I think, that's his management style. But I also have seen Donald Trump in some of the worst times of his life and probably some of the best times of his life, at least in the last, 9 years.
This is really fascinating. I want to ask you a question about I think DeSantis took a pretty big hit in Florida last night, and I would love your thoughts on this. Jacksonville, which has been a GOP stronghold, just elected a Democrat, a woman, first woman mayor of Jacksonville, Donna Deegan, and she beat a guy who'd been endorsed by Ron DeSantis and who outraised her 4-1. Am I reading too much into this? It seems like a big defeat for Ron DeSantis.
Well, I don't think you're reading too much into it. Look, I would always caution somebody from directly correlating an endorsement to someone else's election victory. Okay. And the reason for that is candidates matter and running a campaign matters and all those things matter. That being said, it does go to the political nature of making good endorsements, right? So what we also saw last night was Kentucky. The gubernatorial election for the Republicans was in Kentucky last night. The African-American Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, was endorsed by Donald Trump. The former ambassador to the United Nations under Donald Trump and to Canada, Kelly Craft, was endorsed by Ron DeSantis. Kelly finished third in that race. She finished third and it wasn't close. She lost by 30 points. And again, maybe part of that was the quality and the caliber of the candidate and the campaign that was run. But it also goes to show Ron DeSantis was 0-2 last night, taking a major loss in his home state. The first time they've lost the Jacksonville mayor's race in really recent memory, and Ron was all in there. And so, I think you always have to caution yourself of understanding a candidate's coattails or blaming a candidate for an election loss. So I don't think you're reading too much into it, but it is only a microcosm of what I think is to come. And we've seen Donald Trump have enormous electoral success in endorsements of primaries, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to the general election victories. And at the end of the day, you got to win the race that you're in first, but the goal is to win the whole thing.
Yeah, we saw that in New Hampshire's general election with Caroline Leavitt, who is a superstar and who I think is phenomenal. I think is going to do amazing things for the Republican Party in the future. And of course, General Don Bolduc, who is running for Senate against Maggie Hassan. I thought they were
lunatic, by the way.
What?
The guy was unfit for office, just to be clear. Don Bolduc was a complete lunatic. Okay, unfit, completely should not have even been on the ballot. I respect his military credentials. My brother served in the United States Marine Corps for 23 years. So my father was in the Army. My grandfather was in World War II. We are a military family. Don Bolduc is not someone who should have been in the United States Senate.
Okay. I think he was, I met him, chatted with him for a really, really long time. I agree with you. I sort of agree with you. Great military guy. Thank you for your service. But I really liked him. He was really nice. I think he would be a lot better than Maggie Hassan, though.
I'm a partisan, right? I'm a partisan, but I'm also a realist. And bad government is worse than no government, to be honest with you. And we have seen bad government across the board. And I think if Don Bolduc would have been elected to the United States Senate, it would have been a disservice and an embarrassment to the Republicans across the field. I would not support him. I was very candid with my assessment to Donald Trump to not support him. I thought Caroline Leavitt was a phenomenal candidate. I loved her. I thought she had spunk and tenacity and fire. And I agree with you, Pam. I think she's going to, if she chooses to get into electoral politics in the future, she will be successful. I told her I think she has the capacity to be the governor, a U.S. senator from New Hampshire, anything she wants. She's phenomenal. She resonated with people. She went out there and worked her tail off, earned the opportunity to be the Republican nominee, and ultimately lost in a race that was probably beyond her control because of the national political environment. But that said, I think Caroline Leavitt, if she would have made it to Washington, despite of her young age, being 25, would have been a tremendous asset and an opportunity for young women to look to and say, look where she was 5 years ago in college, and today she's a member of Congress. Look, that's a great success story. Even though she lost, she didn't lose. I think she raised her profile. I think she ran an incredibly strong campaign. And just because you didn't have success at the ballot box doesn't mean it's a long-term loss.
Cory, I just want to ask you about another issue that I think is going to be really important in the general election. I totally agree with you that, Trump's support with his base is absolutely rock solid. There's no question to me that he's going to be the Republican nominee. And by the way, I knew he was going to be the Republican nominee in 2016 before even some Republicans, not Pam, but other Republicans I talked to were like, no, he's not going to be the nominee. I was like, what are you kidding? He's obviously going to be the nominee. He's obviously going to be the nominee. And he is signaling a shift on abortion. I think one of the other, what I call the big three issues, the second one I'm going to get to, is gun violence. Now, earlier in his term, he signaled that he was open to some gun safety measures, but then it seemed like, that obviously that didn't come to pass. Will we see a similar shift on gun safety that we're now seeing on abortion from Trump?
I don't know. I will say that I remember during his administration, there was this thing called a bump stock. If you remember it, it's a part of a gun that basically they outlawed. I am a Second Amendment guy, right? I'm a total gun guy, right? I was a police officer in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, I didn't even know what a bump stock was. So when they banned this thing, some of the gun enthusiasts went up in arms, and I said, listen, I'm a guy who's got guns, right? I always have. I don't know what the issue was, and Donald Trump was kind of taken back by what the issue was on that matter. So do I think there's an opportunity? I think the Supreme Court just ruled today, as a matter of fact, that in Wisconsin, they will allow an assault weapons ban to stay in effect. The U.S.
That's
Supreme
news
Court,
to me. I hadn't seen that. Wow.
that just happened today. So, I think what we're seeing across the country, and this always happens to be the case, is as an issue continues to percolate, not just once or twice or three times, but it seems now on a very regular occurrence, we're seeing this mass violence being committed with the use of firearms. And we have to get to the reason for that. Is it a mental health deficiency? Is it that we don't have enough laws on the books? Is it access to weapons? Is it, what is the real reason for that? And I think somebody has to come up with a solution. And look, what we have known is when you just straight out ban guns in cities like Chicago or at the time Washington, D.C., it didn't correlate to a reduction in violent crimes because of those weapons. So I caution people of saying, all we're going to do is ban every gun in America and that's going to stop the violence. Because if that was the case, Chicago and Philadelphia and New York City would be the safest cities in America. And statistically speaking, they're not.
It's impossible to ban all the guns in the country. And, even a gun guy like you, I'm sure would agree with me that mass shootings are abhorrent. And you are at least raising the issue of whether there are enough laws on the books. And a lot of Republicans won't even go there. They just switch the topic to mental health, which obviously is a factor. But is it the only factor? I personally don't think that it is. I think it has to do with access to guns and who has access to guns.
Well, do you remember the great late Charlton Heston? So,
Yes.
well, not only was he Moses, but later in his career, he became He became the president of the National Rifle
That's
Association.
right. I had forgotten that.
So
Wow.
Tom Selleck, Charlton Heston, when Charlton Heston was elected almost 30 years ago now, I think it was 30 years ago this year, in his acceptance speech, he said, you know what we'll do if the at the time, the Clinton administration is willing to prosecute every criminal who is attempting to use any gun in any felony, including the purchase of a gun in one major city in America, the NRA will support any piece of legislation, the bill that at the time the Clinton administration wanted in favor of, which means if you walked into a gun store and you were a felon, you tried to buy a gun, every person in that major city was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And the Department of Justice said, we don't have the ability to do it. That was literally 30 years ago. And I have my own inclinations and my own stories about the Department of Justice today and what has transpired over the last 6 years. But there has to be a will to actually go after the people who are committing these crimes. And again, we can talk about Rudy Giuliani and what his current predicaments are. But when he was elected mayor of New York City, the first thing he did, he started to crack down on those individuals who were washing your car at the stop sign with their spit. And he started going after them for jaywalking. And when you prosecuted those crimes, it prevented the larger crimes from happening. And I think in some of these places, there is no desire to prosecute some of these individuals for those crimes.
No, I agree with you. I mean, you look at Chicago and, every weekend there'll be a statistic that's thrown out that said, over the weekend, there were 63 shootings and, 42 people were injured and 12 died. And that's every weekend. And these people do not possess the guns lawfully. So.
Well, it was interesting because the Democratic National Convention this year happens to be being held in a city where the violence rate, you have it's 5 out of every 100,000 people are being murdered, right? Under that scenario, their own delegates, if they bring 500,000 delegates to the convention, 25 of them are dead. I mean, it's just not a good idea. And so, 2 weeks ago, I've got twin 8th graders who go to the public school systems here in the state of New Hampshire, and their school trip was to the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. And knowing of the violence there, I refused to let my 2 boys go there for fear. Isn't that a sad state of affairs that one of the founding cities of our entire country, you have to worry about safety for your children to go there? I mean, there is no mother who wants to raise their child on the south side of Chicago today. Not one in America.
Pam raised the issue of illegal guns, which I also think is a really important issue, because there are people who are not supposed to have guns who do them, who do have them. Is that something that you think Trump might be willing to look at, cracking down on illegal guns?
Absolutely.
Because I don't think the NRA, I think the NRA likes illegal guns. They get more sales that way.
You know what I think? I think anybody who is bringing guns in, predominantly from the southern border, we have an unbelievably porous border. We're the only civilized country in the world that doesn't close their borders, right? We have an immigration system that is so broken that if you were to recommend us to go to the Australian system or the Canadian system, one which is based on a need as opposed to numbers, right? You'd be considered xenophobic, racist, misogynistic, and every other word under the books. But, no one blames Australia for saying if we have a certain need, we're going to recruit those people to come here. We see not only guns, but much worse than guns is the fentanyl pouring across the southern border. We know that in the last year alone, the Texas Department of Public Safety has confiscated enough fentanyl coming from the southern border to kill every man, woman, and child in the United States. When does that crisis raise to a level of people actually caring? It's 3,000 people a week. It's a 9/11 tragedy every week in this country. And by and large, the media doesn't cover it. And by and large, this administration has said, we have a secure border. At some point, people have to get up and do something. And what I saw just yesterday was the governor of Texas has asked all the Republican governors in America to send troops and state police and technology. And a number of them are doing that because they've spent $4.5 billion of Texas taxpayer money securing a border, which is really the job of the federal government.
Right. And if people in the country are not paying attention to the numbers that we're seeing at the border and the fentanyl crisis, then they are just shutting their eyes to, like you said, a complete disaster that occurs every single day. Mara and I see it firsthand in our lives. And it's an absolute shame, and it's terrible, horrible.
I would have to disagree respectfully that that what's happening at the border is not as you're reporting. I don't think we have an open border. We are seeing a reduction in immigration. People thought when Title 42 ended, there would be a surge. There is no surge, but we can agree to disagree on this. That's fine.
You're not wrong about that, Maura. You're not
No,
wrong.
I actually don't, because we're never going to agree. And I really want to ask you about possible.
I agree with you on this. There was no surge at Title 42.
Yeah.
Okay. When Title 42 expired, there was all this discussion that there was going to be a massive surge coming across the border. That did not transpire. And the reason partially was because of the increased security leading up to Title 42. And if you listen to Customs and Border Protection Patrol officers, they're apprehending thousands of people a day. And the real concern is the human smuggling, the rape that's taking place, the human trafficking, which is taking place. At what point, if you go and look at that, do we say no more? It won't be tolerated. When do we contact our contemporaries and our government officials in the other countries? Because they're not all coming from Mexico. These are individuals who are walking from the triangle all the way through Mexico to claim asylum. And that's
Corey, we shouldn't talk about it. We're never going to agree. And that's totally fine. And I really do. And I appreciate everything you're saying. I really do. And 2/3 of Democrats think that immigration should be more strongly enforced. So it's not just Republicans who have concerns. But I do want to ask you about candidates for vice president, because I have two theories about leading contenders, and I want to know what you think. The first, and I think the reports that you're working for, and I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is it Vivek Ramaswamy?
That is one of the candidates who's currently running for president.
And I see him as a leading contender for VP, because I think having two white males is not a good idea. And he's been very pro-Trump in everything that he said. The other person that I know Pam has one she wants to ask about, but the other one that I really have thought about for years is Elise Stefanik. She has been she's really changed politically since she was first elected. And she's become very, very loyal to Trump, really on everything. And I'm thinking, he might like to run with a woman who supports him in everything.
Pam,
those are my theories. Huh?
I want to see who Pam's other option is.
I would go with Governor Kristi Noem.
So of those candidates, I know them all very well. I think Vivek Ramaswamy, who is he's incredibly smart, amazingly articulate, Ivy League educated. He's 37 years old, has sold 2 companies, and some say his net worth is north of $2 billion. I think he is raising his profile, doesn't truly believe he's going to be the president of the United States, but has created an immense following. He will be on the debate stage, and that will play to his advantage. I also think that the governor's race in Ohio is an open race in 2 years. And if he loses this race, he could be the governor of the 8th largest state in America at 40 years old. He could also be very much considered to be a nominee or potential nominee for the Treasury, Secretary of Treasury position in the next Republican administration. So that's one. Elise Stefanik, I happen to know very well. I've traveled with her around the country. We've campaigned with personal friends. And so I say this out of respect and admiration to her. She doesn't bring anything to the table other than being one of 435 members of Congress from an area of a state which you're not going to win. I think she's been a phenomenal leader in the House, but she doesn't have a big fundraising prowess and doesn't have a large national profile. Now, have we seen members of Congress pluck from obscurity, a la Paul Ryan with Mitt Romney? Sure, right? He was the Ways and Means Committee chairman, and really nobody knew who he was, but sure. Is she a contender? I think so. Let me give you another name. Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa. Exceptionally smart, is a 2-term governor, was a lieutenant governor before that, a county commissioner, has been in career she's been a career politician, but she's very good and very loyal. And it happens to be the first state to hold a presidential primary, presidential caucus. I think Kristi Noem has a phenomenal record, big supporter of President Trump, has raised her profile and done a lot of the really good things. The downside is you're from a small state, which Republicans will take for granted. If they don't win in South Dakota and North Dakota and Wyoming and Utah, we're in big trouble in an election. So, but having her on the ticket, particularly if it came to debating Kamala Harris, great. And the only other name I would throw out, and I will concede that Donald Trump is the only individual who I don't believe has to choose someone based on their ethnicity or their race, because he is such a cult of personality that when I was the chairman of the Vice Presidential Selection Committee and picked Mike Pence, nobody said you can't have two old white guys, right? They said we need a guy who's going to soften Donald Trump up and knows Washington, D.C. Look, I think Tim Scott, who's going to launch his presidential campaign next Monday, is a phenomenal candidate. He is a rags to riches American success story whose literal grandfather was a slave. 2 generations ago, his family were slaves. And today he's a United States senator and has a real opportunity. He's going to announce on Monday, he's running for president of the United States. He's dynamic. He is unbelievably good on the stump and getting better. And he continues to raise money. And you know, I think he's someone who really people should be paying attention to also.
What I know you know him well. What happened to Governor Chris Christie? Like, what I have recently in the news, like, just going to town on President Trump, and I'm like, I don't understand what happened. I know like 4 years ago they were close, and now all of a sudden he hates them. What's the story there?
Well, look, Governor Christie was the chairman of our transition team. I named him. I appointed him the chairman of our transition team in 2016, so that if Donald Trump had won, he would help put the government together. The truth is, and it's publicly known, that Jared Kushner and Chris Christie are mortal enemies. And it goes back to the fact that when Jared Kushner's father was in New Jersey conducting illegal activities, Chris Christie was the U.S. attorney, and Jared Kushner's uncle turned his own brother in, and Chris Christie had nothing but an obligation under the law to prosecute him, put him in jail. Now, where Jared really took exception, because Jared was an undergraduate at Harvard at the time, was that when Chris Christie, when Charlie Kushner came up for parole, Chris Christie actually flew to Alabama and protested the parole. So this wasn't just like, hey, we're going to let him out. Chris actually flew down there as the U.S. attorney and said no. And Charlie ended up spending like another 7 months in jail. So Jared took it very personally. And so there has always been that animus between the Kushners and Chris Christie. Chris Christie was offered for a brief period the opportunity to potentially be the chief of staff in the White House. And that did not go over well with the Kushners. And I think Chris, who is a very capable politician, he's a smart guy. Mary Pat, his wife, is an incredible woman. I know her very well. He's got 3 great kids. And I do think a little bit, and I would say this, and I talk to Chris often, I think he's a little jealous that he missed his window. And if he would have run for president of the United States in 2012 against Barack Obama, regardless of the popularity, I think Chris could have given him a good run for his money, probably a better run than Mitt Romney gave him, probably would have won the nomination. And running for president is a moment in time. You have to catch lightning in a bottle, no matter who you are. You can't recapture that 4 years later, which would have been 2016. And now you fast forward 8 years, and Chris's only path, if you will, to the Republican nomination is being the anti-Trump candidate. And that path is riddled with mistakes because it's not a clean path. There's multiple other candidates in that path. So I think there's a little bit of personality there. And Chris, I think, is probably a little disappointed looking back now to 2012 that he didn't make the decision to run himself.
That's really interesting, because I remember back in 2012, thinking that like Chris Christie was so great because he was like so outspoken. And then as time goes by and then Donald Trump comes along and like say 2015, I was like, wow, like Chris Christie was sort of like the original Trump in a sense. Like he was outspoken and had that New Jersey bombastic attitude. And obviously Donald Trump like takes it up 100 degrees. But I mean, I feel like Christie was sort of like that original Trump Trump light. And then Trump came along. And then so it's sort of like, well, what do we need Christie for if we have Trump, right? Like, that's my
And we looked at Governor Christie very hard to be the vice presidential nominee with us. So as the chairman of the committee, it was just a 3-person committee, me, the former ambassador to Australia, and some dirtbag who ended up in jail for a while named Manafort. It was just the 3 of us that got to make the choice. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump basically said, hey, fellas, figure it out. I don't care who you pick, basically, because I'm going to be the president and I don't really care. So it was an extensive, it was a 22-person deep dive with every social media story that they had ever been part of, posted to Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and you name it. I mean, it was an exceptionally intense thing, including all their tax returns. This was no joke. This was a serious thing. And Chris Christie was one of the 3 finalists, along with obviously Mike Pence. And it wasn't until I went to A.B. Culverhouse's office, who was the 3rd member of our committee, and he had done the same project for Mitt Romney as he was considering others, and Bush before him. A.B. is kind of a well-known political powerhouse in D.C., and he was an attorney. And so we used his office, and he basically started providing us the opposition research, which the team had put together on our 3 finalists. And it came down to, and it's a slight exaggeration, but it came down to, the last 3. And when they handed me the piece of paper on Mike Pence and said, Mike got a parking ticket once, he paid double the fine and prayed to God. I said, there's our guy. Right?
Guy. So do you think that Trump's experience with Pence as his vice president would cause him to have a different approach to picking a running mate this time? Might he have a different role for his vice president in his 2nd term from the one that Mike Pence had in his 1st?
I was the only person in America to be paid by both Donald Trump and Mike Pence at the same time. I served as a senior advisor to both campaigns, both entities, all through their 4 years in the White House. So I was the head of Mike Pence's outside group. I served as a senior advisor there. So I traveled with the vice president a lot. I traveled with the president an enormous amount of times. I thought the 2 were perfect for each other. Mike Pence was incredibly differential. He never made a mistake in his time in the White House. He looked like a computer program. If you had to say what the vice president looked like, here's the guy, gray hair, perfect, right? Speaks perfectly, perfect inflection. Somewhat, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, somewhat boring, but never to overshadow the president, right? He knew exactly what his role was and was exceptionally grateful for the opportunity. Don't forget, Mike Pence, when we asked him to join the ticket, was on a Friday afternoon. He had to make his decision because under the state of Indiana's laws, you could not both run for a federal office and the governor at the same time. And we flew Mike up into Teterboro and landed him there at 4:00 in the afternoon because he wanted to see Donald Trump one last time before 5 o'clock before he pulled the trigger. And so that's how close it was. And I think, look, I think being the vice president to Donald Trump is an incredibly difficult job. When you look at what Dick Cheney's job was for George W. Bush, they were almost equals, right? Dick Cheney had worlds of experience where George W. Bush was the governor of Texas, which sounds really great, but the governor of Texas doesn't really have any authority, right? Really, the lieutenant governor does. And now you see Barack Obama. What did he do? He picked Joe Biden, someone with 50 years of Washington, D.C. experience to offset his experience. I think if Donald Trump were given the opportunity to go back, I think he would look to an outsider. That's just my initial take. Someone who's not in Washington, D.C. full time. Someone who is very potentially a female. I think the names that you've mentioned are very real. Kristi Noem, Kim Reynolds. Some say Nikki Haley, but I think the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley would preclude that. I happen to know kind of where that really stands. So I think that the VP list for Trump is small. Loyalty is a significant factor to him, and somebody who has the ability to go out and fight. Because what most people don't recognize about Donald Trump is the reason he goes out and fights is particularly true when nobody else is fighting for him. When he sees his staff, Corey Lewandowski, Kellyanne Conway, whoever it is, on television fighting for Donald Trump, he doesn't feel as obligated to go out and do it. when Kayleigh McEnany was behind the podium or Sarah Huckabee was behind the podium, fighting the narrative that he wanted to push back on, you didn't see Donald Trump out there. When those individuals weren't there anymore or weren't doing the job, that's when you would see him call an impromptu press conference or bring the media in. And so I think part of the requirement of the vice president in a next Trump administration, if there is one, would be someone who's going to go out and fight.
Yeah, yesterday, Corey, I had the opportunity to meet Mike Pence for the first time. I was at the New Hampshire Home Builders. They had like a lunchtime meet and greet with him. There's about 20 of us there, and I met him for the first time. And first of all, I just did not know what to expect. And I've always had a good feeling about him. I've always respected him, but just really didn't know a tremendous about him. And he was really warm, number one. So when I first met him, he was extremely warm, very gracious. And then he talked to us for a little bit, and I was like, wow, he's really nice. And he was funny. And he talked for quite some time about how much he loves President Trump and how thankful he is for President Trump and how thankful he is for those 4 years. And he was really, really gracious and very thankful. And I kind of, after hearing for a while, I kind of wouldn't expect him to be another way, but I was sort of surprised because I didn't know what the relationship was at this point in time, but he was like, I love President Trump. Fantastic. So I was really taken back, but also it made me feel good.
Mike Pence, and I say this, is a truly good man. Truly, to his core, he's a good man. He and his family put God in front of everything else. Every decision they make is made after consultation with God. And I'll tell you this story. As I was finalizing the potential list to be a vice presidential candidate, I had to call a mutual friend of ours who was an Indiana resident. I called him. I said, hey, do you think Governor Pence would ever want to be considered? And Steve called me back. He said, let me call the governor. I knew Mike, but I didn't know him well. And I didn't want to call him and make it look like, the story get out. So he says, let me call him and get right back to you, Corey. I say, hey, no problem. So the guy calls me back and he says, the governor and Karen are driving their daughter to college this weekend, and they're going to talk to God and pray on it. And I said, does he have a direct line to God? How long does this take? Because I need an answer, right? I'm seeing Trump at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. So if God doesn't get back to him by that time, he's off the list. And I waited all weekend, like I always, and then all of a sudden I'm walking up to go see Mr. Trump at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. And I had this massive Excel document, which had everybody's name on it, date of birth, social security number, military history, veteran status, the whole thing, everything, right? And the very last thing on there in pen, Mike Pence, I write it in because he called me 5 minutes before and said, yes, he wants to be. I write it in. I still have a piece of paper. I'll probably put it in the presidential library. And what Donald Trump did is I gave it to him as this big giant spreadsheet, and he looked at it, he took out his black marker from his pen, from his pocket, and he wrote the initial D on it, meaning Donald means the paper was approved. D. So I have that paper that says, here are the people that Donald Trump considered to be the vice presidential candidates. Mike Pence's name was written in pen because he waited so long because he wanted to talk to God. And I truly believe he wanted to pray on what was best for him and his family, knowing the pros and cons. I've flown with him and Karen a lot on Air Force Two. I have never, ever heard Mike Pence say a bad word about anybody on anything, ever, never once. That's who he is. He's a truly, truly good person.
Corey, I just want to ask you the last three of the big issues that I think the Republicans need to move on if they're going to move beyond their base, and that's climate change. When you're looking at the electorate in 2022, 40% is going to be millennials and Gen Z. Climate is one of their top concerns. What might we see any movement from Trump or Republicans on fighting climate change and reducing our dependence on fossil fuels?
So I think the real issue is what's the rest of the world going to do? We only, the United States only represents about 12% of the climate matters in the entire world. So even if we were to force reductions onto our providers of fossil fuels, what does that do to China? What does it do to India? The Deputy Secretary of Energy was testifying last week in front of the US Senate, and Senator Kennedy from Louisiana asked him a question. I'm sure you saw it. He said, if we give you the $50 billion that you're asking for climate change matters in the United States, how much is that going to reduce either the CO2 going on or the temperature, the core temperature of the Earth? How much is it? $50 billion. How much is it going to matter? And his answer was, I have no idea. Well, what are you going to do with $50 billion? Well, we're going to try and do these things. The problem is it's a global issue. And while the United States can be a leader on some things, when you represent 12% of the total carbon emissions in the world, if the other leaders of this world don't have a desire, and they clearly don't, to engage in the matter, then it's very hard. And look, I think unfortunately, and I know you're not going to like this, there's a lot of hypocrisy around this issue. You know, John Kerry flies over to talk about climate change on his private jet. And they say, John, how do you do that? And he said, well, I bought the offset. What the fuck does that mean? I bought an offset. I planted 3 more plants. I mean, it's the hypocrisy of the ultra wealthy who want to have their lifestyle and then preach to everybody else of what they should do. You must reduce your carbon footprint as I fly around on my plane, Bill Gates, to Australia to go and take my yacht out. You know, it's very hard for the average person who's barely getting by, who had to pay $4 a gallon of gasoline to get to work every day, and now it's only $3.05, to sit there and say, you want me to stop driving to work? Because we tried this 2 years ago during COVID. Nobody went to work.
But Corey, you do understand that young voters are not going to say, oh yeah, well, since the United States isn't everything, we're not going to do it. They are going to demand, they are demanding that our leaders do everything they can. I mean, we live in New England, the Northeast of the United States, which is more impacted by climate change than any other part of the world. We are seeing it with our very own eyes. We see houses on the Cape literally falling into a cliff. The climate, I said to my daughter a few weeks, no, last winter, I said, the climate of my childhood is gone. She said, the climate of my childhood is gone. So this is what you're going to hear from a lot of voters, but especially Gen X and millennials. And if the answer is, well, the rest of the world isn't doing anything, so we're not going to either, they're not going to have it.
No, I think the question is, are you a monolithic voter, right? Because it's one issue of many. And I think the days of being the single issue voter are gone. The days of only voting for someone because of their pro-life or pro-choice stance, the days of voting for someone because the world is too complex for that. You know, I may not necessarily agree with someone on their issue of life or abortion, but I could agree with them on 6 other things and say that's the best candidate to represent me. And I think the issue of climate is one of those. There are people who are exceptionally passionate about this particular matter, but they also must ask themselves, if I continue to allow the status quo to transpire, is it going to get any better? Because right now we supposedly have a president in the White House who has made this a priority. And so if we now have a record of that individual over 4 years, but maybe their economy hasn't been so good. So maybe they're pro-Joe Biden on the issue of climate, but maybe they're anti-Joe Biden on the issue of their personal economy and their personal safety and drugs and other issues, right? So I think voters are very sophisticated. I say it all the time, right? I don't think there's any one issue that you can look at and say, oh my God, this is the issue that is going to drive every voter to the polls. There's a lot of discussion about the issue of abortion and the impact that that's going to have in the upcoming election. The number one issue, you know what the number one issue is in the state of Iowa right now, according to the public opinion polls, 24% of the people, you know what it is? China buying foreign ag land, China buying farms. Foreign agents buying farms for fear of national security implications. So not abortion, not ethanol, not the climate. 24% of the respondents said that the number one issue facing the people of Iowa right now is China coming in and buying their ag land. That is unheard of. Nobody could have predicted that 8 or 10 years ago. It was not even a topic of conversation, because in theory, conservatives say, hey, go sell your land to anybody you want. It's yours, right? Now conservatives are saying, you can't sell to that Chinese conglomerate who's going to come in and take out our slaughterhouses, to take out our cattle, to take out the food that we grow every day, because we're the breadbasket of America, and decide to stop growing. Because once they control your food, they control you. And that is an amazing story that has really started to percolate up through the polling data right now.
Cory, you just said something that sort of dragged my thought process here. Do you think that today, and compare both parties to maybe 20, 30 years ago, that today the Republican Party stands with sort of like the blue collar guy, the middle class, when 30 years ago we didn't. And today the Democrats stand more with like the well-educated, wealthier people. And that wasn't like that 20, 30 years ago. Is that true or no?
Well, look, I think if you look at the coastal elites, the people who have terminating degrees, so PhDs, LLMs, et cetera, that are predominantly
JD.
working, JD, right? JD, right? Somebody on the east and the west of the country, right? Those coastal elites that are working at the institutions of higher learning are vastly considered liberals, Democrats, progressives, whatever term you want to use, right? There's very few ultra conservatives at Harvard University. There may be, I mean, I was a fellow at Harvard. Okay. I mean, it wasn't easy. I went over to Stanford and was over there. I taught at Chicago, but I was by far in the minority. This is not somewhere where conservatives feel comfortable. So what do I see? I see, Pam, to your point, your question is many of those blue collar workers in Michigan, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, Western PA, right? Allegheny County, those who relied on us to build things, that saw their jobs exported for the cost of cheaper labor overseas when it came to the opportunity to export jobs and import products, lost their livelihoods, and they want those back. Now, is it a reality? I don't know. We see car manufacturing very difficult because now it's robots and some of it's taking place in South Carolina now because it's cheaper, et cetera. But the truth is, the American people have an insatiable appetite for the best quality at the lowest price. And because of that, our system has been designed now that it's cheaper to import these things from overseas than to pay the workers. And that is a real tragedy going forward. So I think there is a subset of the blue collar workers, particularly in what they call the blue wall, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, places where Donald Trump won in 16, but didn't in 20, who had been disenfranchised by both the Democrats and Republicans for saying, we're going to ship your jobs overseas. Don't worry about it. You'll get a better product. You have to pay, and you'll pay less for it. And so I think the Republicans have tried to get there. I think, in 20 years, I think the Democratic Party is completely unrecognizable. Not only could JFK never win his nomination, Bill Clinton could never win the nomination today. Don't forget, Bill Clinton was a Southern governor of a conservative state when he ran for president of the United States. And he lost to Paul Tsongas from Massachusetts in the New Hampshire primary, but he came in second place, so they called him the comeback kid, right? Because he was never supposed to do that. And he went on to basically govern with a balanced budget, right? Bill Clinton balanced the budget when the Republicans had control of the House and the Senate. That's the last time our government's budget was balanced, was under the Clinton administration, right? The conservative Democrat from a moderate or conservative state as the governor doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And so if Bill Clinton were to run today to the Democratic nomination, he would be run out of the party by the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders of the world, saying you're not progressive enough.
Yeah.
We've seen that on the right too. Ronald Reagan couldn't get the nomination today. No way.
Here's the thing. I think on the right, what you have is you've got such a divide of those who are the purists, right? That Chris Sununu will never be the Republican nominee for governor, for president. Chris is a very good general election candidate, a la Charlie Baker, a la Larry Hogan, right? A la the guy up in Vermont, Scott, right? These guys are very good general election candidates. And when you look at their favorability ratings, they're always in the top 10 nationwide for governor favorability ratings. But nowadays, if they had a serious challenge from the right, they can't win a Republican primary. And I believe, and I happen to know something about this, that's why Charlie Baker didn't run for his last term, even though he could have, is he knew he would have lost a Republican primary.
Absolutely. No question, Corey. I serve on the Massachusetts Democratic State Committee, and that was really clear. The Massachusetts Republican State Committee shifted considerably while Baker was governor. He tried to stop it from happening. He tried to get people elected to the state committee who would be more moderate. He wasn't able to do that. And he just got to the point where he couldn't get the Republican nomination anymore. You did work on the Jeff Deal campaign. So I just want to ask you quickly for your insights. But before I do, tell you that the general consensus in Massachusetts was that there was no way that Jeff Deal was going to win. So if you have any part of you thinking that maybe they could have done something differently, no way. He just couldn't win.
Well, you have to remember, look, part of it is Jeff was not a good fundraiser. That's part of it. But more than that, it was a huge opportunity for the Democrats to pick up a seat that had been held in Republican hands for, I think, like
it was 8 years
of the last 30 years. Other than what's his name? The guy from the western part of the state, African-American guy. What's his name? The governor.
Deval Patrick. Yeah.
Deval Patrick. Other than him, the Republicans have held that seat since Bill Weld. He's the only Democrat to hold that seat. So from Bill Weld to Paul Cellucci to Jane Swift to Mitt Romney, right? Deval Patrick won, but then Charlie Baker won. I mean, that means more Republicans have held the governor's seat in Massachusetts than in the state of New Hampshire.
That's Massachusetts. We're not as blue as people think we are. Yeah.
Well, but look, I don't think anybody had the false notion that Jeff Deal was going to win that race, except the curse of the AG is very real in Massachusetts.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
You know, ask Scott Harshbarger, he didn't do so well.
That's so funny. Cory, first of all, I had about 22 questions I wanted to ask you, and we got to 0 of them. Just
Then I'm winning. That's called winning.
Come back.
Have you come back, because I wanted you to tell us stories about like the Trump campaign and all of this great stuff I wanted to talk about, and we didn't talk about any of it, even though I enjoyed everything we talked about, but we got to absolutely nothing. So you're definitely going to have to come back again if you will.
I totally enjoyed this too. And I mean, Cory, obviously we're not going to agree on things. And part of this, that's what this whole show is about. We don't agree. It's okay. We'll still treat each other with respect and we like each other. So it's been an incredible conversation. I don't know if you could tell, Cory, but I was taking notes like the whole time because you kept saying quotable things.
Well, thank you. And hopefully I didn't get myself in trouble, which I tend to do. But look, let me just end with this because, I don't know really who the viewership is, but I'm a guy who grew up in a place called Lowell, Massachusetts. So if you're from Massachusetts, you know it. Okay.
WCAP. That was my radio show on CAP. Right? Yeah.
980 WCAP. So I grew up.
Yes, the voice of the valley.
Yeah. Right above Cappy's Copper Kettle is where that was.
Oh my God. Yes.
So, I grew up in a place that we had no money. Nobody had any money. We were poor, but nobody knew they were poor because everybody was poor. Right. And it was truly a melting pot. Lowell has a history of, it didn't matter if you're blue, white, green, orange, purple, yellow. It didn't matter. Everybody was equal. And what that city did for me was it instilled in me the value of hard work. And because of the things that I learned going to the public schools in Lowell, from the Greenell to the Robinson, right? I thought I could do anything because they always told me I could. And I ended up going from a kid in Lowell, Massachusetts, who had no money, who didn't know anybody who ever owned 2 cars in their life, to flying around an Air Force One around the world and not just meeting a president, but traveling with him and calling him my friend. I mean, that only happens in this great country, and it only happens by saying yes. So my final message is, a lot of people get opportunities in life to do different things, and it's very easy to say no. No, I can't do it. You come up with an excuse and a reason why. Just take a chance and say yes sometime. Say yes, I'll try it, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find something you love or get an opportunity you didn't know existed. Because saying no is easy, saying yes is hard. And a lot of us make sacrifices, but, I think at the end of the day, I helped to change the direction of the country. I hope for the better. Some could argue maybe not, but I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. And it's all because of, the values I learned growing up in Lowell with a union printer as my grandfather for 40 years at Sullivan Printing. So, it's still the most gracious, amazing country that the world has ever known, and it's a place that you don't have to be born into to be a king to be successful in this country. So I'm grateful.
I love your story, and you and I have been friends for over 20 years. And I remember when you and I were working at the Smith campaign, and we were both really young, but you're a lot younger than I am. But I just like all these years and everything that you have accomplished. I'm really proud of you, and I'm really proud to be your friend. And I know you're going to continue to do really, really amazing things. And I think it's fantastic. And I think you're great.
Well, thank you both for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Okay.
We really do too. We really do. I told all my friends, I was talking to Corey Lewandowski. They're like, oh my God, that's so cool. So thank you. Thank you so much.
I need like, I want stories. We need to talk a lot of stories. But this is
Sure.
You're coming back. You're coming back. Thank you so much, Corey Lewandowski.
Okay, thank you. Have a
Take
great day.
care.
Bye.
Okay. That was such a fascinating discussion. Oh my God.
that was so great. Isn't he great?
He's incredibly informed. He was surprisingly frank at points. There were points where I thought, you know, he was being diplomatic and maybe phrasing things carefully. Other times he was just really, I mean, the stuff he said about the vice presidential selection process and all that was like, that was stunning. And that Chris Christie was asked to be chief of staff. That's incredible. And Kushner killed it.
I don't know if he said he was asked to be the chief of staff, but I think it was being considered for sure. But yeah, I couldn't remember.
My notes say he was offered chief of staff, but Kushner objected.
That could be. I don't know. But I couldn't remember because I remember them being good friends at some point in time. And then just recently just seeing some press clips about some really nasty stuff that he was saying about Trump. And I was just sort of like, I don't know what happened. When did this turn?
There has definitely been a shift. And I think Christie's been saying, I think Sununu has been as well. But if I'm mistaken, can a listener please let me know? But I think both of them have been saying that, you know, that they don't think Trump should be the nominee. I think one of them even said he won't be the nominee. I don't see how he's not the nominee, but we'll see.
I don't see it either way, but like Cory is just so wholly informed and always up to date. And I know he's taken a lot of flack in the press over the years. And at the end of the day, people who give him a hard time, I don't think they realize how intelligent he is. Like, he is so intelligent.
He's clearly a smart guy. I mean, and one of the things that I wanted to ask him and didn't get to was because he does have a public image. You know, he does have this tough kid, tough guy image. What is it that he wants people to know about him? You're shaking your head like you think he's not a tough guy.
No. Like, no, I agree. And it's like, right. That's the image that's out there for sure. Yeah.
But that was a real conversation we just had. I mean, and that's, you know, back to what we were saying earlier, that's what nonviolent political communication is all about. It's not, I mean, at one point I did say, okay, we have to stop talking about this because we're never going to agree, which is fair. And he accepted that. He didn't push me. He's like, okay, we'll stop talking about this now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I literally, as you know, I had 12 questions I wanted to ask him about.
Did I hog the guest?
No, it's just that like he started in right away. We kind of just started getting into like, and I wanted to revisit the past because I wanted to hear the stories about like, how did you get approached to even work at the Trump campaign? And how did that go? And what happened when you first met him? And what did you think? And what did you think about the early the campaign? And
I wanted to hear about that too. Yep.
But
we did. We just kind of launched and all of a sudden we're like, you know, talking about this stuff. I never asked. I also wanted to ask about LGBTQ rights because that's a really important cause. And certainly DeSantis is horrible in LGBTQ rights. And Trump like way back in the beginning of his campaign, he signaled support for I think what he called gay rights, but what we would call LGBTQ rights. So I just wanted to know if there might be any movement on that. But if Corey Lewandowski will come back, I can ask him next time.
I'm sure he will. We'll have him back at some point in time and like, let's run through some of the old stuff that we wanted to talk about as well as the new stuff. Because we never even got to the Mueller report and the John Durham report.
No, I know.
Talk about that because it was all about the Russia.
Well, and I was fascinated when he was talking about, really was fascinated pretty much the entire interview, but I was taking notes at certain key points. And he was talking about how Trump thrives on chaos, and that's his management style. So he's actually creating the chaos that we see from the outside. And also when Cory was talking about how when Trump feels that his staffers or his consultants or whoever they are in the press advocating for him, then you don't hear from him. But if he feels like they're not stepping up enough, then that's when he'll make an appearance in the media. That was really interesting.
He's really, I mean, I think Trump is a really complex figure. And I told you about when we got to meet him back in 2015, the very early days of the campaign, and we were like in a VIP room, they called it. There's about 20 of us in there. We were all from Hampton, sort of like Hampton Republican officials. And Donald Trump, who was not president then, started talking to us, and he was extremely gracious and very cordial and very warm. He was not bombastic or rude or loud. I mean, so I kind of saw at the beginning that there was like two different versions of this guy, because like I said, when we went out into the auditorium, right, he just became his
turned it on. Yeah, and make no mistake, I think Trump is horrible. I think he was a disaster for the United States, and I'm going to do everything in my power to stop him from being elected again.
Darn you, Mara, I will stop you.
But that's why we're having these conversations. I mean, and I really appreciated when we were talking about the policy differences between Trump and DeSantis. I thought that Cory laid those out, some of them really well. And what he had to say about Trump's perspective on the military. And so, I mean, it's really helpful to have this stuff crystallized, because we do live sort of under a constant state of bombardment. And there are so many issues going on, so many things being played out all the time. We really need to focus sometimes and just think, okay, well, this is the difference. This is what they'll do if they're elected. That's what I think it's all about. What will the candidate do if they're elected?
Right. And there's a lot of noise. And just think of, like, I know what my average day is, right? I have to get up. I have to go to work. I have an extremely sick husband at home. I have a disabled dog. I have a lot on my plate. So yeah. I don't always, not always, the vast majority of time, I don't have the time to sit down and say, what's the difference between Ron DeSantis and President Trump? Like, I don't have the time for it. I have small windows of time where I can pay attention to small things. And yeah. I feel like the average citizen, maybe you're the single mom who's got 2 or 3 or 4 kids. Maybe you go to school. Maybe you've got 2 jobs. Maybe you're battling through a divorce. I don't know. There's every different situation under the sun, and people don't, or the vast amount of people don't have the luxury of, being able to watch all the news programs and read all the blogs and the newspapers. And, there's just only so much time for so much stuff. And so I do think that Cory's analysis actually was really good, because in a short period of time, he was able to give us a lot of information that people can.
Yes. And that incredible nugget when I was asking him about abortion, because Trump has signaled, that he thinks 6 weeks is too short and we need to have exceptions. DeSantis, of course, has not. And Cory's explanation is, well, DeSantis got $30 million from someone who supports the position that DeSantis is holding at this time. And I always thought, well, DeSantis is doing it for political reasons, but I hadn't had confirmation. Well, it's because someone's basically paying him. Someone is paying him to have that position.
Yeah. Welcome to big time politics, Mara. Seriously.
Well, I'm of course, completely pro-choice. And I'm running a campaign myself on that issue, because the person I'm running against is anti-choice. And it's a huge difference between us. This is a really important issue for voters.
Well, listen, this was great.
Oh my God, it was so great. It was so great. So folks, come back next time. We're going to have another fascinating guest. Please sign up for us, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, YouTube. Give us a 5-star review if you can, so that more people can find our podcast. Follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, just at Going Disparate. And drop us an email. We'd love to hear from you at pamandmara@gmail.com. And just remember, sometimes your adversary can turn out to be one of your best friends.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.